Good morning. If you could find a seat, I am going to give a welcome and give an invocation for us. But first, I have a practical question. Is Hebron Solomon here? We have your wallet. You left it somewhere. So if Hebron is here, you can come and find me over at that table, and I'll give it back to you. I'm Charity Osborne, if we have not had the pleasure of meeting yet. I'm the Associate Dean of Undergraduate Studies in the School of Business, Government, and Economics here at SPU, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this year's Burton and Raylene Walls Distinguished Speaker Series. As I'm sure you're aware, we'll be hearing from Dr. Dorothy Nyambi about her journey as a leader in international development, but first we'll take some time to eat the food that's lined up outside and enjoy each other's company. Will you join me in a prayer of invocation? O God, architect of the earth and everything on it, giver of every gift, we pause before this meal to thank you for the gifts of food and fellowship and education, and to enthusiastically invite you to stay with us here and transform us through the power of your Spirit. In a world where so many are hungry, may we eat this food with humble hearts. In a world where so many are lonely, may we share this fellowship with joy. Bless our honored guest, Dr. Nyambi, and open our hearts to receive the message she brings. Thank you for your generosity and care. Amen. Lunch, as I said, is out in the hall. I asked Becky, do we have any special instructions? And she said, yes, just be orderly. So in an orderly fashion, no fist fighting or anything. You can make your way out to the hall to help yourself to some lunch, and we will begin the formal program in 20 minutes, I think. So take a few minutes and enjoy.
All right, folks. Sorry to disturb your lunch, but please continue eating as we get on with the program. Just a word of welcome to you all. Thank you for being here. We've got folks from all sorts of areas of the university and external and community partners, and we're just grateful for you to be here. But in particular, I want to thank our students for being here. We're a school that wants to model good leaders to you. One of our mission statement as a School of Business, Government, and Economics, it says, we develop leaders. And so we want to bring leaders to campus so you can see them up in person and hear from them and learn from them. And so just thank you for being here. Also, I'd like to do another special thank you to Becky Johnson and Joyce Kwan and Jenna Gillum. Can we all give them a hand? These folks are amazing. They just roll with the punches, and they have been working on this event for many months, and so just grateful to them for their wonderful work. Also, now I'd just like to talk a little bit about the lecture series, and we're thankful today to have Bert and Raylene Walls with us. They are the sponsors and have set up an endowment. They established this endowment in 2013, so to enable us to have what, in essence, is a free lunch, right? Which is awesome. We were just saying, is there anything such as a free lunch anymore? But I don't know, this might come close. You know, Bert and Raylene have deep roots at our university. As I say, they established this endowment in 2013. They're very interested in developing in our students an entrepreneurial spirit and a knowledge of, deep knowledge of business. Bert's father, Dr. Wesley Walls, was the first director of our school. Back then it was just a school of business. He was a faculty member and administrator here for 38 years. So Bert's grown up around SPU. His uncle, Dr. Paul Walls, was a trustee of the university for a long period of time. And of course, Bert is an alumnus of our school and a very successful entrepreneur in his own right. And he has a deep love and desire to foster this entrepreneurial spirit and bring entrepreneurship and innovation to our campus and foster it among our students. Along with this lecture series, he's recently donated a significant pool of money for our launch fund, and we've just been talking at the table that it's going to be renamed the Bootstrapper and Gazelle Fund, but we'll go into that a little bit more later. Maybe not, I don't know. That's an interesting idea. But he was very interested in encouraging amongst our students innovation, entrepreneurship, and creative thinking. And one of the joys of my job has been getting to know Bert and Raylene over the last few years. And so, Bert, without further ado, I'd just like to ask you to come and say a few words. Thanks so much.
I hope you realize you just gave my speech. So if you hear a little feedback on that, it's because he just gave my speech. But anyway, all right. Raylene and I would like to welcome you to another great chapter in the Distinguished Speaker Series. We did take a little break for COVID, but the world continues to evolve, and so will this series. The Walls family goes back a long way at SPC, SPU history. My dad, Dr. Walls, was a professor of political science, and yes, I took a class from him, and I got a C. He was associated with the school for almost 40 years, 38 I guess now, and one of his many tasks was starting the School of Business. My uncle, Paul, was chairman of the board for many years and funded a building and a professorship, among other contributions, to South Pacific University. My interest and affection for SPC, SPU runs deep. The Distinguished Speaker Series and other projects here at SPU is a part of our goal to give back. I grew up on the campus here and watched most of the major buildings being built. I graduated from SPC in 1966, which seems like a long time ago. Between high school and graduation and the end of my freshman year, I started and ran two businesses, a painting company and a laundry business. Probably didn't know that at that time, South Pacific rented out rooms for the World's Fair in 1962. So the die was cast, and for me, and after I got fired from my job at the Magnolia hardware store, I never worked for another company. I generated my own paychecks, at least when I was actually able to take a paycheck. Along the way, I started an electrical business, contracting business, and bought some real estate that nobody seemed to want and refurbished it. It is my belief that each of you here today is capable of being a distinguished speaker in some venue. To do that, you must have absolute faith in who you are. You are the ones that have your back. No one else can do that. You must have faith in you and what you can do. You must also have the desire to work tirelessly to achieve your goals. You should also remember that no is just a starting position. You need to use your God-given talents to get to yes. Life is good. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Bert. Now it's my distinct pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Dorothy Nyambi from the Mennonite Economic Development Association. She is the president and chief executive officer of that organization. It's a nonprofit, and it specializes in creating solutions to poverty around the world. particularly business solutions. She's a thought leader in international development, devoted to creating dynamic organizations that respect diversity, equity, and inclusion, and succeed in times of challenge and change. With a Doctor of Medicine degree from the University of Yaoundé in Cameroon, Dorothy has undertaken extensive research in capacity building, advancing gender equality in developing countries and innovation economies around the world. Prior to joining MEDA, Dorothy has been the Executive Vice President of the African Institute of Mathematical Sciences, and Dorothy's professional experience includes strengthening business processes and mobilizing funding in support of grassroots organizations and movements, creating community impact and diversity in Africa, North America, Eastern Europe, Asia, Latin America, the Caribbean, and the Middle East. She is passionate about gender equality and inclusion. Dorothy is a leader and founding member of Gender Summit Africa in Cape Town and in Kigali. She is a member of the Women's Rights and Development Movement. For the last 15 years, a board director of the Kigali Collaborative Research Center with Carnegie Mellon, and a member of Board Africa, focused on mentoring and getting young African women into governance roles across the continent of Africa through selection, training, and mentoring. It's a real pleasure to have her here. Dorothy, her leadership at MEDA and her work there is to provide, as I say, business-led solutions to poverty, provide decent work, and collaborate with others. In December last year, MEDA announced, in partnership with MasterCard Foundation, a $200 million fund where they are funding business opportunity in 7 targeted African nations. MEDA has a great slogan, and I love to get their magazine called Marketplace quite frequently, and it has a great slogan, I wish we thought of it, where Christian faith gets down to business. It's a terrific slogan, and this is really what MEDA is about, and I would suggest what our School of Business, Government, and Economics is about. We believe in business-led human flourishing, informed by our faith. We believe in developing leaders, and that's just really what we're about. And so as a leader in business-led human flourishing, we are thrilled to welcome Dorothy to the stage today. Dr. Nyambi, please come forward and speak to us. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you so much, Dean Ross, Joanne. Thank you, Bert, for sponsoring this event. Like everybody else, you come here, you're scripted, but the first thing I want to say is something that my grandmother always used to tell us, my mother's mother, never went to school. She said, never go to write an exam immediately after you eat. And we couldn't figure it out, but as I went to school and learned a little bit more biology and everything, we probably figured out that, all the blood goes down to the GI tract and there's nothing left in the brain. And so if I'm not sounding too coherent, it's because we're having this exam right after the meal. But it is really my pleasure, to be here. And just really an honor, to be given this opportunity to, what I say, share my story. But it's also, for me, an opportunity to learn and even unlearn some things that I have. I really like what Bert said at the end about, no is just the start. And I'm like, damn, that is real. I think, it's my age, I'm sort of hearing that for the first time. So, Bert, thank you. Because each time we think about no as a starting point, things are going to be different. So when I was invited to come and be a distinguished speaker last year, like everything else, a few quick things went through my mind. I said, okay, I think I already know SPU. I know Joanne. I've read about SPU, but haven't been around the campus now for a couple of days. I don't think I really knew the campus. I think it's so different when you come, you touch, you feel, you meet people. So thanks to everybody, Becky and the team for the welcome and the reception, the students who didn't even know me, who took me from the Uber and got me back to the right door where I was supposed to go. Thank you all. I said, what is a distinguished speaker series as HPU? So I tried to look that up. Then I also said, who have been the speakers before me? Why me? What is it that I'm going to say that others haven't heard before? So I posed all these questions in my mind last year. And as I learned more about who, Seattle Pacific University was and is, I then really realized that there was values alignment. And that, the past speakers, from Condoleezza Rice to Dr. David Williams, that, there's a values connection. There's a values connection last year. So I began to feel comfortable about the opportunity. And so just before I start, I want to say, Ross introduced me, they read my bio. But I always like to add that when I think about myself, I always think about what I call my 3 M's. I'm a mother, medicine, and manager. I think all of us, doesn't matter what stages in our lives in, even, I can remember my children at the age of 1 or 2, they were already managers in their own little ways. They had their brain. And it's in hindsight, I think, everybody is managing. The children try to manage us as parents, then they manage us even more, and everything. And so everybody is a manager. The title, president, CEO, those are titles, but the real action there is managing. And so today, I think what I want to focus on is my own journey as a leader. And it has not been a journey that had a straight line. Many people sitting in this room today would say, maybe you've come to university, you finished high school, and you thought, well, I want to do international development. I want to be a lawyer. I want to be a lawyer and I'll work in human rights. I want to be a medical doctor and I want to be a neurosurgeon. People really think through what they want to be. But I have to say, if I'm standing here today, on this day in May 2023, there was nothing in my pathway, there was nothing in my beginnings that would have made me thought that for any reason, I will be here today talking about my leadership journey. So I was born in Cameroon. So if I may just ask, how many people here know where Cameroon is on the African continent? Okay, quite a few. Who has been to Cameroon here? Okay, so we have somebody who's been to Cameroon. Okay, yeah, so I was born in Cameroon, and I was privileged in the fact that my father and my mother, they went to university. They went to university, so me and my brothers were second-generation university graduates. And we were born at the cusp at the time. My parents went to university just when African countries were getting their independence. So that was in the 60s, so you probably all guess my age by this point and everything. And what that did was we came into a society as young adults where our parents, they believed that the only way out of poverty or anything that they were going to do was education. And so they got education for themselves. And then my grandmother, the one who told us, don't eat before you go write an exam, she was a business person in the family. But when all she did was take her money and buy education for her 3 girls. Her girls got married and they bought more education for us, the children. The other thing that my grandmother used to tell us when we were growing up was, doesn't matter what title and degree you have, if you cannot work for yourself, someday somebody will just fire you. Because unless you own your business, and she'd never been to school, she would tell us that. The third thing that she told us, growing up was, if you run your business, make sure you run it in a premises that you own. She told us that you will spend all your money running the business and paying somebody else's rent. So all of those things didn't mean much to us many years back. We just thought, she's smart, Nini as we call her, and everything. But as I look back now and I think you read Harvard Business Reviews, and I said, my goodness, what if my grandmother had gone to school? I wonder what would have happened. So with that, it was all about buy more education, get really educated. That is what it was. Africa was just coming out of colonization. And so the idea was, the Africans who were going to run the continent needed to have not even the same education like their colonial masters, but maybe something a little bit below. And it was very deliberate to make sure that they don't get the full level of qualification. So in many ways, a system was built where people continued to be dependent. So some of us were born, in that nexus, in that cusp of time, where our parents were coming out of colonization. We were sort of that first generation of children of independence and everything. There was a lot of what I call looking up to a culture that did not belong to the continent as defining what were the standards and what were the norms and everything. So with all of that, got to go to school, so I did that part and, did many things, at home in our culture. You had to go to school, you have to come back, help at home. There was nothing. Today we talk about child labor. And I was in Ghana recently, and somebody running his cocoa farm, he asked a very pertinent question, that if you have your cocoa fields and you're running it, you come back home in the evening and you have all these cocoa pods to split. Why should you not invite your children to come and sit around and split those cocoa pods with you? Why should you go find somebody else? And ask some of us and say, well, you all who live elsewhere, if you have something to do at your family in Canada, would you not call, your children to come and sit around the kitchen table with you to prepare the pastry, something? And that when they do it, it's the same thing. And somehow when they do it, the rest of the world may refer to it as child labor, when they are looking at it as building family, building community. So with all of that, I think for me, my journey, as I said, had lots of different trends. So I trained to be a medical doctor. And remember my parents coming from the era of the first level of independence, post-colonialism. Everybody was extremely happy. I felt that's something I wanted to do. I wanted to be able to take care of people and make sure that I can make them feel better. But as I did that work, there were so many different challenges. It was not a journey that was easy. Back then, most medical doctors were men. Most medical doctors, some of them, before even Africans became medical doctors, most of the medical doctors were missionaries, white men, mainly. The white women tend to be nurses, and they would have come. And so when they started training Africans, they were mostly black men. And then later on, women started getting trained, as medical doctors. So there was a whole issue of trust. Do they trust you can even deliver their baby? Do they trust you that, you can fix this appendicitis? So I get into a profession where, even as a woman and as a black woman working in Africa, the journey is not easy. But you have to get up every day and say, what is it that keeps you going? And like Bert said, I think no is always a starting point. So what does it feel like when somebody brings their wife in labor and they see you're a female doctor, and they say, no, we don't want you. We don't trust you. We don't think you can do it. They're looking for a male doctor. So you have to help them understand, plead with them, and let them work with you. So at each time, even when I worked as a doctor, we spent time trying to break barriers and just continue to move forward. But the more I worked as a medical doctor, I think after about 15 years, I realized there's no value in being downstream. And I'll give an example. I'm working in a hospital in the northern part of Cameroon, somebody who's been to Cameroon here. And in one night, I'm the only doctor on call. There is an assistant, a nurse assistant, and there is a cleaner. And that same night, you can have 10 women come in labor to have babies. If God is really good to you, 4 of those women may just have their babies natural birth, and you'll be lucky that the cleaner can help you manage them. And then you have another 4 who have signs of complications. You are able to take one of them to the operating theater because the baby is breech or something, the bleeding internally. By the time you come out, the other 3 have died. And you begin to wonder, what can you do? And for me, those were some of the big turning points. Because to be a doctor, a medical doctor, it's almost and it doesn't matter where in the world, even in the United States, I live now in Canada, it's almost like you are downstream, you are on the receiving end. We all saw the videos and the pictures during the COVID pandemic. And people were going across cadavers, and doctors, the medical system was overwhelmed. And some of us stepped back and we said, boy, this is the day-to-day in many African countries. It's not the exception. In certain parts of the world, COVID was the exception. In the parts of the world where some of us had worked, that was the norm, that was the day-to-day. So in light of that, with all of that happening, I had 3 choices as a medical doctor to, number 1, become oblivious to the fact that, people can die, that's okay, if I can save one, I'm okay. So that was my first option. My second option was just continue, quit being a medical doctor, go be a lawyer, go do something else. I can go be an engineer, I can go work somewhere else. And then sometimes I even thought maybe I just start my own business like my grandmother always used to do. And the third one was I could actually leave where I was and try to go upstream and figure out how we could fix the system or contribute in fixing the system so that it can even handle people or prevent people from coming down into the abyss of the health system in a manner that we could not sustain them. And I think for me, it was part of this thinking and transition that then catapulted me into a different sector. So I was in the health sector. I was direct healthcare delivery. And due to what was happening in the sector, I made that decision to go upstream and go into public health. I really like public health. I still think that even in my role today at MEDA, I'm working in public health. And the reason being that there's so many factors that come in terms of allowing people to have a good and strong well-being. And it is not just the absence of disease, as we all know. So more than 20 years ago, I decided no more being a doctor. So you can imagine what happened in my family. My mother break down, my father break down. Post-colonial, they thought their daughter was going to be a doctor and save the whole world. I said, I can't save. I said, there's no saving down there in the abyss. We got to go figure out and try to help to fix things at the top. And so I'm going to stop being a medical doctor. And each time you switch, so in life, I'd worked as a medical doctor, and you have lots of opportunities to work and to lead the different ways of leadership, as a medical doctor or a healthcare professional in general. Then I switch now, I go to public health, and I have to start again from the base, from the beginning, because there are people there who are ahead of me and everything. So each time you make a switch and a turn, be ready to say, you're going to start from the bottom or from any other part, and so. And in all of this, I'm talking about leadership journey. At no point in time did I personally think that, oh yeah, here I think I'm a leader. I I wanted to do medicine, went into public health, worked in different not-for-profit organizations, did some work for governments, but continued to just push. There were times that I felt that I had come backwards. But as I got into international development, so that journey took me from direct health, public health, and then this world of international development. And I think if I'm still in it today, it's a miracle. It's resilience. It's my ability to not know what tomorrow is going to be and to be okay with it. And I say so because if anybody thought that medicine was difficult, they should try international development. And international development is very complex. It started with missionaries way back when. You know, in my family, I was born into a Presbyterian family because my father, the missionaries who came to his great-great-grandfather, they were Presbyterian missionaries from Basel, Switzerland. My mother was a Roman Catholic because the people who showed up in my great-great-grandmother's door were Roman Catholic priests. So I could be anything. I could be, it depends on who showed up on whose great-grandfather's doorstep. It's what determined how we all ended up. The other piece, you know, as I moved into international development, which was very clear, was, you know, missionaries had come before, and they did a lot of schooling, helped the widows, worked with orphans, built schools, started building clinics and hospitals. Then we had the First and Second World War, and after the Second World War is when international development sort of became professionalized, when there was a Marshall Plan for Europe, and the CARES of the world got created, and many other organizations, 1945, during that period. And as that whole sector became professionalized and was created, given the colonial history that it also came up with and everything, there was a whole sense of what I call saviorism. People who live from one part of the world to go help people who are different in another part of the world. So there's that piece. Then there's the colonial history of the people themselves who are in need or who want to have something done. So that combination and that whole recipe makes international development an extremely complex issue. So how do we explain that since 1945, let's forget till now, we still have countries that are underdeveloped, developing, not developing. And what is it in that system that is stopping, you know, the countries from, what is it that we continue to do? You know, today I sit in what we call an international NGO, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. There's something about the sector that makes it really difficult for things to advance. And it brings me back to my grandmother from the beginning, and where she used to tell us, no matter how much you went to school, if you didn't do your own business and somebody would fire you. So that was one. But the other thing that my grandmother taught us was the value of business. We saw in her, for a grandmother who had not gone to school, her sense of pride, her sense of agency. It did not matter, but she was very happy that she could sell her cassava and pay her children's school fees. She didn't have to beg. She didn't have to do anything. She was very proud that she could borrow and pay it back. So it gave her an extreme sense of agency that hopefully, I think it filled that onto some of us. And so with that, you know, as I got into international development, I didn't just get in there as Dorothy, the former medical doctor. I got in as Dorothy, a Black woman. And international development was very heavily male-dominated. That's number one. Number two, if any of you just Google international development now and you say images of international development, there's an imagery of poverty. That immediately, that's what, you know, the search engines, they'll just pour those over to you and everything. And so some of us came into this space And we said, number one, it doesn't have to be like that. Number two, we have to work and say, what does it mean to change a system rather than just trying to change a few people? Because if you try to fix a few people and you leave them in a bad system, they cannot survive. Right? So it is really hard work to fix a system when a lot of what we want to do in international development is what we call the quick fix. And the quick fix sometimes may feel good, but is it the right thing to do? And sometimes the right thing to do is really, really difficult. So in all of this, I'm trying to still move myself along and stop being a doctor. And so sometimes, it helps, I'll throw it out there. So they'll say, so what are you? I'll say, oh, I'm Dr. Nyambi. And then I'll say, I studied medicine. Then they might give me a bit of respect. But other than that, you come into this field of international development where the sense of saviorism, people want to do good to help others feel good about what they're doing, and yet those systems are not changing. So the barriers continue to show up, and for me, being who I am, I have certain more levels of those barriers. Because some of the things that people expect to hear in the sector, they don't expect it to come from people like me, but from people who are different from me and who are coming from outside. And again, it's part of that colonial mentality, but part of what the sector has built out ourselves. So some of the big things for me, and I want to say that I certainly am speaking here as a Black female leader in international development. I have learned, even being who I am, that to be a leader, I have to listen. I have to really listen to people and understand what they're telling me. And I want to emphasize the part about listening, because when we listen, do we really hear? There's something even about, are we listening with respect? So I won't go into all of that, but for me, listening, hearing people, acknowledging and translating that into action is really important. I really believe in promoting diversity, that everybody can bring their voice to the table and we can help to shape something. And so whether the problem is in Malawi or the problem is in Brooklyn, New York, if people can come together, or in Toronto, Canada, and you bring diverse opinions, the solution is certainly going to be stronger than one or two people or one person having the solution. So I push, as a leader personally, I really value promoting this sense of diversity and inclusion. The third thing that I personally value as a leader, and I'm still on the journey because I haven't landed, is, to be ready to challenge the power structures that exist. From whether it was being in medical school, coming out as a doctor, trying to get into international development, is dissecting and really understanding where the power sits and interrogating that, working with that, using that in the appropriate way. So understanding the power is really important. Capacities, building capacity exchange. So from 1945 to 2023, there's many years in between. And we've been doing this work in international development. And I believe that there's been a lot of progress. So we need to question ourselves, if we are working in 2023, how do we work differently from when we're working in 1945? In addition to that, there's the World Wide Web. There's the World Wide Web. There's ways of accessing things. We're just talking about Kiva. The Kiva platform, it's a game changer. People can access finances now in ways that were not possible before. If somebody is running their business in Timbuktu, they can go on YouTube and get a whole lesson without talking to anybody sitting in this room, right? So how do we recognize these game changers, how the world has changed, and stop doing the work in the same way that we're doing? Certainly, last but not the least, we must prioritize the sustainability. So as a leader, I really believe in, we got to take care of this earth, this planet, for our children. It's really, and our children's children, that all of us who are here now, we must think about the next generations and the generations after and do that. And in all this, I say so to say, my personal principles of leadership are really grounded on focusing on what is the difference between doing the right thing versus doing what is nice and feels good. And sometimes the right thing is not always about, it's not the easy one, the easy thing to do. And so, as I said, when I started this talk, the one thing that I think for me has been really consistent about what it means to be a leader, being who I am, working in multiple spaces, working in a sector where there's a lot of resistance, there are lots of barriers for somebody like me, has been my values. And as I come to SPU, I think for me, the one thing that really resonated was really when I found out that, SPU is really values-driven. And I normally am not someone who says I give advice, but I just say my only reminder to everybody here who is affiliated to SPU is that you're already blessed. Your journey here has already begun. I don't think it will take as long as it took for me in my journey to be on this side of the room. It's not too long ago, I was on that side of the room. But for all of you sitting here, you will soon all be on this side of the room telling people about your own journeys. And I think that, it is so important because what is the rock and the bedrock of, I think, leadership is being honest and true to your own values and everything. I have learned in many ways, the value of humility, to recognize what I don't know, to recognize, where I can bring voice, where I need to just step back. And when it is time, I will come. I have recognized the value of authenticity, of being who I am, right? And that's my grandmother. I want to go back. She never went to school. We call her Nini, but part of Cameroon where I come from. And she always said it was so important for her to be her true self. Even though she was a Roman Catholic Christian, she lived in a part of the city that was the Muslim part of the city. And that's how she was a business person. And I don't know about other parts of the world, but in most of Africa, when the Christians came, they did everything. People went to school, went to health, they worked. When the Muslims came, they looked at the people and they said, let's do business. So you're Arabs, you're traders, and they were the business people. So my grandmother lived in the midst of the Muslim people, even though she was a Roman Catholic Christian. So she picked up a lot of those business skills, and they supported her in her business and everything. So, but she was always authentic to herself. She never converted. She stayed a Roman Catholic, but she said that's who she was, but she loved all her Muslim friends, and they helped her do business, help her with her kids, and so she stayed authentic to herself. I've learned, as part of my journey, the importance of just building relationships, but building authentic relationships, being really true about those relationships, not only for the people you work with, but in international development, when we get to communities to work, let us be really, really authentic about why we are there and why we've come. During the HIV/AIDS pandemic, I was working as a medical doctor back then, and we used to say 3 things. Number 1, international organizations will come, and we as local staff will say, okay, what kind of cake did they bring this time? So there were 3 kinds of cake. We had the organizations and the donors who will just come and say, well, here, this is a fruit cake. We want you to deliver it. This is a fruit cake. This is what we know that this is what is going to fix HIV/AIDS in this country. So that was the first group. They would just come. There was no turning around or beating around the bush. The second group will come, call all of us to sit under a mango tree or a palm tree, and they had the fruit cake, and then they'll come, they say they're consulting with us. And then they'll talk, and they'll convince us that the fruit cake is what we needed. So that was the second kind. And the third kind that showed up, they will come and they say, we truly don't know what it is. How can we help you? What is working? What will work here for you? So there were 3 kinds of cakes that would show up in international development during the HIV/AIDS pandemic. In many ways, we used to really like the first kind of cake because they just told us what they wanted. It got very difficult with the middle people who pretended that they thought they were consulting with us. It was very difficult to work with them. Those who came and they said, oh, you tell us, we didn't trust them. We didn't know whether they really meant it. So we needed time. But if they were on a time crunch, then we knew that they were not serious. Because if you really want to hear people, then give them the time that they need to be able to give you the right answer. And as a lot of us say in Africa, when somebody tells you yes, is it a yes? Is it a no? Is it a maybe? So the word yes doesn't mean yes. So it can mean many things. It can mean maybe, it can mean let's talk again. It can mean, there are many things that word yes can mean. And so understanding that culture and everything was really important, working in the sector and everything. So let me just go back, a few steps, before I land. My family and I, we moved to Canada about 20 years ago. And people move for different reasons. I was senior professional in international development. My husband is an engineer. We have 3 children. So we decided to move to Canada. We wanted our children to keep their French. We're very strong about, having multiple languages, within the family. So we moved to Canada, and we had to start all over. It was, so at every time in your life, we find ourselves, we're starting over. We come to Canada, they say, well, we're new immigrants, we don't understand the Canadian way. And we said, well, we've brought our children as parents. We have to be stewards to our own children, right? And do everything that we needed to do so that, they can settle in this new country and everything. So I get to Canada, and I'm working in international development. And I'm going to land. And in international development, I'm now in North America. I'm no longer in the global south. I'm no longer working in Africa. I'd worked in Africa, Europe, come down to Latin America. But now we'd come to set up home in Canada. And I was going to work in international development. Was that difficult? It was so difficult. Because in this society, my lived experience meant nothing. The fact that I was African didn't quite mean anything. It was like somebody who had gone to school and done African studies, visited Africa 2 times, was the specialist on the issue. And so we learned that, humility, patience, that is going to take many steps, to try to get anywhere. And that is, you've got to do things for others to recognize you, that you can lead, for you to be given the opportunity. So we get to Canada 20 years ago. I worked in several international development organizations, and I feel like my break came through because I had what I would call an accomplice and not an ally. And there's a difference, because for people like me, we all say, for diversity and inclusion, you need to have allies. And I said, I don't want allies. I'm always looking for accomplices. And the difference is this. So I got hired by this organization, and I was made a program officer. There was a senior program officer who was my boss. So we went on a field trip to Rwanda. It was a USAID-funded project. And she came back, and she went and told her boss. She said, she doesn't think she can continue to be my boss because I know more than her. And her boss called me, and within 3 months, they made me the boss of my former boss. It was the biggest lesson in management I've ever dealt with. My former boss, whom I became her boss, she's my best friend, mentor today. She's a white woman. She told me, she said, she cannot live a lie to think that she knows better than me. But what she did was she actually got out of the way. She actually said that. So she was an accomplice to help to change the situation with everybody on that chain who allowed her decision to flow. So when that happened and everything, I think for me, that was the takeoff point in my own career now in the global north, in international development. And with that, I was able to have different positions of responsibilities, lots of challenges, lots of setbacks, and everything, but always realizing now that I think each time you hear no, that's just the starting point. You need to start. You need to think as a leader, how to be persistent, how to be resilient and everything. So I did that work and went back to the African continent, whilst we're based now in Canada for maybe the past from 20, I'll say maybe about 7 years ago. Because I just came back again into Canada about 4 years ago with a different opportunity. And so I say all of this because I come here today as the president and CEO of the Mennonite Economic Development Associates. My journey is not a linear journey. It's not been without, obstacles and challenges. But I think, the few things that for me have really helped me together, not just those principles, but my faith. As I said, I was born into a Presbyterian family. My mother was Roman Catholic. But in the 80s, there was a revival movement in Africa, so I got rebaptized, and I consider myself an unapologetic Anabaptist Christian. So I really believe that, there is hard work, there's work to be done in terms of what you need to do. There's certainly a greater God up there that watches and so on, but it doesn't prevent you. You must do the hard work. Again, I step back to say that because Africa, as we say, is a continent where people are praying the most. Whilst we're here trying to work, they're busy praying. But yet they have the great number of disease, most of the poverty. So there's a misalignment in many places around how they think that, religion is going to help them get out of their woes. But people, you have to put the hard work and everything. So I moved back to Africa and then came back, and I was coming back to Canada. And there were different opportunities that had come my way as I was looking to come back now to Canada in 2018. And so amongst one of them was this job to be the president and CEO of the Mennonite Economic Development Associates. So I'm not a Mennonite by theology. I'm certainly not a Mennonite by genealogy. But what really attracted me was business, faith, and development. My grandmother always said, if you were a good business person, the church didn't really kind of want you, and all of those things. There was always those things. So I could hear things from my grandmother's voice. And here was this organization I knew some about, but not too much about, and they were bringing together faith in an ethical manner, business, and they're working in development. Remember, I had come through the HIV/AIDS epidemic. I've seen water sanitation programs. People go and dig wells. The wells will close up. The things that people do that are not systemic. So I thought, wow, this is a time and the opportunity for me to be able to join an organization that believes in business. Because I was still looking for that opportunity. Because whether it's in health or education, if you look at it as a business solution, chances are that is going to stay and outlive after the time you spend with them. So I go into the interview, and honestly, I didn't think I'll get the job after the first interview. I won't go into the details, but I go into the room. I'm a Black woman, and my friend had told me, Dorothy, just show up, so that they really know who you are. So I show up in a dress like this. I didn't have a black pantsuit. I had braids on my hair, and I get into the room, and there are about 20 white people. And thank God for my grandmother's agency. So the first thing at the interview, before the interview starts, I take a deep breath, and they ask me if I'm okay. So I said, I'm not okay. I thought to myself, this is a really important job. 20 people, I've never been to an interview with 20 people. So there was a circle inside and there was a circle outside. I was reassured that only the 6 people in the center were going to talk to me and that the others were observers. And I said, okay. And I told them that they realized that this is abnormal. That's why I didn't think I'll get the job. And we went into a 30-minute conversation about the situation. And then after that, they said, am I okay? I said, well, as okay as I can be, and everything. So we had the interview, And I went out and I told my husband who had driven me there, I said, oh, this is it. I said, I don't think I'll get this job. I said, but for me, it was every opportunity is a teaching opportunity. I felt that, I would love these really nice people who fill this very important position to know that, it's pretty intimidating for me to walk into a room for a position. And so there's no black person, there's no brown person. And so what is this job? So I left. And, I thanked everybody. You get the normal email about, how you call it, to say, we'll get back to you. We're still in the process. So about 2 weeks after, they said that they invited me to a second interview. So I got pretty nervous now. I said, after that display of what I call courage, which I wasn't sure, I'm not sure what's going to happen. So I went for the second interview, and so after the second interview, the same day, they told me now they wanted me to do a presentation. So I said, okay, I'm going to get ready to do the presentation. So I do the presentation. And the day that, I do the presentation and I finish as part of the process, I hadn't even gotten back to my home. They called me to say they want to offer me the position. So I have to take a deep breath. And I said, I think I need to think about this. And so I go into a process with the hiring committee, and what resulted in me asking them that, were they really sure? Because I'm going to come as a black woman, and I'm not ready to be just somebody for the corporate picture. I'm coming because, I have ideas. It may mean that, the things that they appreciate that the organization does, because of my own context and who I am, I might not necessarily appreciate the things that way. And they said, yes, that's fine. We want a change. That's why we're hiring you. And so after some thinking and working with the board, I accepted the position. And as I said, it's been very, not challenging, it's been very eye-opening for both the board, for the staff, within the sector, to have somebody like me who is not willing to be a leader, who comes in and just sits quietly and says, everything is hunky-dory, but to say, how do we shape everything so we can do the right thing? And so for me, it has been what I call a wonderful journey, a journey where I've had to take steps within media, take steps forward, take steps backwards. I've even had to lean on another ally. So beyond an ally, he was an accomplice. And I say this story because when I got to meet them, the opportunity that every leader is looking for is to do a strategic plan. So I got in, they had extended the strategic plan. So I had the opportunity to do a new strategic plan. But the ideas, or however you consult, it's very difficult that any ideas were going to be accepted coming from me. And it's not because the organization didn't want me. People are just not used to that people like me can come in with agency. We're supposed to just come in and sit behind and just do what is going to happen. And so I come in and I said, the world is shifting. We cannot be working in 2018 the way we worked in 1945. When media started, now 70 years ago, it was business solutions. So where are the business solutions in the work that we do? That's what attracted me to the organization, to avoid the organizational drift. And I had to count on an accomplice. My CFO at the time, unfortunately, he's of late. He died in a tragic bicycle accident. But Orvie came on board, and he was Mennonite, and he actually believed in the vision. And I was able to step back, because as a leader, you need to choose. I see media as a wonderful organization. So I actually stepped back, and I let Orvie help me to take the message forward. I didn't feel at any one point that, I was less of the leader, but I needed an accomplice. I needed somebody who could help me. And he did it so extremely well and everything. And as I say, You can plan all you plan. God's plan is God's plan. We lost Orvi to a really tragic bicycle accident a year after. And when those things happen, even for me as a leader in that situation, I'm like, okay, it's time for me to leave. But I just kept pushing. So I think as a leader, it is learning to say, no matter how much it's difficult, no matter what the unknown is, in the midst of COVID, which was a great unknown, just keep continuing. And that's how, through that process of persistence, courage, and everything, as Ross said at the beginning, MIDA was able to earn the trust of the MasterCard Foundation, and we had the biggest grant and access to finance that women in sub-Saharan Africa would have ever gotten to understand, and given to us to execute in a manner that is going to be, the context is going to drive how the money goes out versus the money determining and designing how it's going to be used. So we're really excited, about that, and really looking forward to, the difference that is going to make and what it is going to bring. As I said at the beginning, I'm always considering myself as an unapologetic Anabaptist Christian. As I said, I am not Mennonite, but I am so humbled and feel blessed to be working for a Mennonite organization. The amount of things I have learned. And I want to say that in the Mennonite tradition, there is a philosophy of what they call commitments to assignment. And I've seen it, lived it, and for me, that is part of what is continuing to build any kind of leadership qualities that I have. And that commitment to assignment that the Mennonites have, it says, we will serve and learn with readiness to have our lives broaden as we open ourselves to explore new insights for Christian growth and service. We will serve and learn with the readiness to have our lives broaden as we open ourselves to explore new insights for Christian growth and service. So with that, I would just ask if we could play the video on MIDA so I can stop talking so that you all have opportunity to ask questions. So if we can just play the MIDA video. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Entrepreneurs around the world risk it all to create something from nothing. They face uncertainty, encounter challenges, and rise above circumstances to make their dreams a reality. It's so much more than starting a business. It's about persistence, courage, and innovation to turn a vision into a successful business. Entrepreneurs play a vital role in our communities. They create jobs, drive prosperity for society, and improve the standard of living for themselves and others as they build their businesses. At MIDA, we believe in the power of entrepreneurship. For nearly 70 years, we've partnered with entrepreneurs experiencing poverty in the global south so that they can access the resources they need to thrive. That's why we're taking time to celebrate entrepreneurship around the globe. We're confident that our unique approach of providing access to finance and technical assistance is the best way to equip entrepreneurs and support them as they build their businesses and work their way out of poverty. Though we're still feeling the effects of the pandemic, we're committed to building back stronger as we work towards our goal of creating and sustaining decent work for 500,000 people in emerging economies by 2030. In the past year, we've worked in more than 12 countries, supporting more than 700,000 clients. We've sharpened our focus on creating systems change in agri-food market systems and working with strategic partners. Our work is focused on creating and sustaining decent work opportunities, working towards the UN Sustainable Development Goal 8. We created or sustained work for 9,000 salaried and 34,000 self-employed people, totaling 43,000 decent work opportunities for our clients. In 2022, we launched new projects in Nicaragua and Guatemala, the Philippines, Ghana, Kenya, Rwanda, Tanzania, and across the African continent. These new projects promote the socioeconomic empowerment of women and youth farmpreneurs, emphasizing access to capital to build businesses, provide technical assistance and training. In line with our strategic plan, we have progressed on our journey to a north-south equilibrium by giving our country officers and partners an increased voice in program design and more autonomy in their work. We want to thank everyone who's been a part of MEDA's work this past year. Thanks to your generous support, we received $9.2 million in donations. Because of your faithful giving, hardworking entrepreneurs in the Global South have been equipped with the resources they need to build sustainable businesses. As we continue to recover from the impact of the pandemic, a new sense of hope has emerged in 2022. We are proud of the progress that's been made in advancing MEDA's mission, vision, and values, and are looking forward to the year ahead. Thank you to all MEDA supporters, staff, clients, and partners as we continue to create and sustain decent work for entrepreneurs in the Global South and work towards an equal world for all. Please join us as we celebrate entrepreneurship.
Thank you, Dr. Dorothy, for that incredible story of your own journey. My name is Joanne Flett, and I serve here at the Center for Faithful Business. And there's music behind them. We have a few minutes for Q&A. We promised to get you out for your classes at 1:30. We just have time for maybe a couple questions. So it is now 1:19. So for the next 5 minutes or so, we'll field a couple of questions. Please keep them brief, and feel free to ask away. I see a gentleman over here. Jenna Gillum and Joyce Kwan are running the mics. So there's Jenna. Yes. We'll try.
Wow, I'll try to. Let's go like that. Okay. I'll try to answer that. I think for me, what I think is, if I want to give an example of one, there are many. It has to be those that actually make sure that they bring a business lens to it. I've seen lots of agricultural projects that are sustainable, that are successful. So whether it is the maize value chain or the rice value chain, and you work with the farmers, you work with the aggregators, you work with the policymaker, you work with your decision makers, something that would allow for every player in the market to get involved. And these are projects that I won't call them projects, they're programs, long-term initiatives. You don't do those things in 3-5 years. You get in there and you sit in there and work with people for 10 to 15 years. So there are some.
Sorry, I think I could do without a mic. I'm really loud.
I wanted to ask you, what is a piece of advice that somebody you've worked with, maybe an entrepreneur, has given you regarding your process and your program? And that you've had time to reflect on and maybe get feedback from that's been important to you?
That's a great question. And I think for me, entrepreneurs, the bottom line, they want to be able to make that paycheck to their workers at the end of every month. And it doesn't matter what you come to try to talk to them about. These are people who, they work for themselves, they engage people who are passionate to work with them, for them. And you have to start with them where they are and what's most important to them. And I find that, most of them, it is, are we producing a service, producing goods that people want, so that at the end of the day, they're able to make sure that the workers who are there for them can depend on them, and get their paycheck. Because a lot of these development programs will come and say, well, we've come because we want you to look at your gender balance, we've come because we want you to look at environment. All those things are important, don't get me wrong. But you meet them where they are, start with them where they are and where they want to start. Is the lesson that, I think we continue to learn.
Time for one more.
Yes.
I see a hand here and I see one.
In your experience because you come from a medical background, but you moved to entrepreneurship, are there any times now where Dr. Nyambi may conflict with CEO Dorothy? And if so, how have you worked around that balance?
Oh, gosh. So, once a doctor, always a doctor. So I consider myself a medical advocate for my family. Right? So I'm a medical advocate for the family. No, I don't think that I conflict. During COVID, there were moments of sitting back and saying that, should I jump back in, to step in there. But I want to say, if there's one field where I really believe you learn to be a leader, it's really in medicine. It's teamwork, and to lead, you have to work with a team. So when a doctor goes in there, you have to count on your anesthetist, your scrub nurse, everybody. But when the patient doesn't make it out, you have to be the one to go out and tell the family that the woman has died. It doesn't matter if the fault was the anesthetist's fault, doesn't matter. You take on that responsibility. So I feel like I've translated the practice of medicine into my day-to-day management. So don't feel conflicted, and then serve as medical advocate for the family, and, I'm happy with that.
Thanks, I'm getting curious.
Okay. Yes.
I asked Dr. Dorothy to stay close by. Dr. Dorothy, what you do every day is courageous. It's courageous to do what you do every day and to do it with the level of generosity and care. I've known Dorothy, for 4 years, and I've appreciated her moral courage when it comes to leading. Moral leaders, morally courageous leaders, act in ways that are loving to promote a world where all people are accepted and they're made to feel like they belong. Moral courage invites people to be and act to reform social structures where well-being, caring relationships are carefully orchestrated so they can create conditions for flourishing. You've been at the forefront of that work, and I've admired you and it. MEDA is an incredible organization, and you're an incredible leader. Thank you for being here with us today. I would like to pray for Dr. Dorothy and dismiss us, but I also want to be careful to thank all of you for being here, particularly our senior leadership team, the president, the provost, and members of the senior leadership team, our faculty, and you, our dear students. Please pray with me as we dismiss. God in heaven, we are grateful for every person and relationship you put us involved with, but we are mostly grateful for you and how you transform us, how you invite us to be transformed people so that we can transform our world on your behalf. You're building your kingdom, and you're using Dr. Dorothy, and you're using MEDA to do that. They're going into the hard places, and they're winning the big grants, and they're transferring a whole way of being that love people into being. Continue to bless her leadership, bless MEDA, open new doors for them in Africa, in South America, in Central Asia. Lord, just bring her all kinds of wisdom and comfort in the days ahead. We thank you for all of her work and her words to us today. May it live on as an example of how you invite us to love and to be in the world. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Yeah. You are dismissed.
Well,